This week on Deconstructing Comics, a review of the new graphic novel by Luke Healy, How to Survive in the North. I'll also talk a bit about our recent listener survey and new Patreon goals. This is Tim.
And this is Kumar.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo with Kumar in Melbourne. September already. Where's the time go? And by the time people hear this, it'll be well into September. When I was at MoCA back in April, and I talked to a few of the publishers, and Nobrow has followed up and offered us a book to review. And so I've actually got a hard copy of it. Kumar dealt with a PDF. But this book is called How to Survive in the North by Luke Healy. And the book itself offers basically no information about who Luke Healy is. So I went looking around online. He just this past spring graduated from the Center for Cartoon Studies.
Okay.
Where I was in March. I didn't meet him, but I guess he was there at the time. And he's apparently, I guess he's Irish.
Okay.
And it says that he was a coloring assistant to Lucy Nisley, who is also a Center for Cartoon Studies graduate, and I've interviewed her on the podcast. And I guess he's done some other work before, published work, not a lot. I guess I take it this is his first full graphic novel type of book. And what it is, it's a lot of it is based on historical fact. Some of it is not. But there are a couple of different narratives about different expeditions to the Arctic. One in 1913 and one in 1921. And now I did a little bit more research because I feel like a little bit of the explanation here is kind of vague. Yeah. So the introduction talks about this guy, Vilhjalmur Stephenson, and that he was trying to prove that there were edible plants and things hiding directly under the ice in the Arctic, and if this was true, then it would be much easier for people to, go explore the Arctic because they could just dig and find food and they wouldn't get scurvy and all this good stuff. The actual comic part of the book never mentions that, which I found a little confounding. At least I didn't see anything. Did you?
No, but that's why the introduction is there. And it sets up his naivety because his whole theory about he has this theory in a book called The Friendly Arctic. Mm-hmm. And yeah, his thing is that he calls the hardships of the Arctic the supposed hardships. He thinks everything's going to be, fun and easy, and you can live there indefinitely as long as you go about it the right way, and it's just like a walk in the park almost. And that's kind of the setup for the expeditions that he sets up in the book, the two that we see in the book, the 1913 and 1921.
Yeah. Now, but the other thing is that I didn't see anything in the book that explained his relationship to the second expedition.
Was very... Yeah.
There were a couple of other guys who were involved in both.
Yes.
Maurer and Knight. Now, I looked on Wikipedia, and it explained that he, quote, encouraged and planned that expedition in 1921.
Yeah.
He didn't go on it.
Right.
And so that made it a little puzzling. I was kind of questioning why it was there.
Okay, I guess we're kind of jumping ahead, but there are 3 timelines. There's the 1913 expedition, which is colored. It's kind of in like yellow colors a lot, like blues and yellows. And there's the 1921 expedition, which is often colored in pinks and reds.
Mm-hmm.
So there's kind of a visual clue. And then there's the present-day fictional
or 2013
storyline, which is kind of like just grays and white kind of stuff.
That's kind of like pastel green and pink.
Right, okay. Yeah. Okay, I'm pretty colorblind, so I shouldn't be talking about this stuff as if I know what I'm saying. But anyway, so the first time I read the book, and there's also at the very start, you get a narrative caption which says 1913 or 1921 or 2013, and that's fine. But somehow, the first time I read it, I kind of glazed over, and and this is not a criticism of the book; it's a criticism of my own reading, and also reading on PDF, which is possibly the worst format because you can't really flip back and forth.
Yeah.
But I conflated the two into one.
That's exactly what I did.
I was like, okay, this is one expedition, and it made sense. And somehow my brain put this logic together. I was like, oh, I understand this.
Yeah, I think my expectation was that it was going to be about one voyage. Right. And so I thought we were seeing different people on the same voyage until some things started to conflict and I started getting confused.
Well, okay, so there's actually certain things that happen, and maybe we'll talk about it a little bit later. But it happens in such a way. So maybe I'll describe it right now. But Stephenson he abandons the ship on the 1913 trip. He says, "I'm gonna go
hunt for some food.
I'm gonna go hunt for some food," and he never comes back. So
yeah, he and several other guys.
Right, but then meanwhile, a few pages earlier, because it cuts back and forth between the expeditions, you get the 1913 one. I'm getting so confused. You get the later one.
Yeah.
And on that, you've got the crew on the ship, and then they say we're not going to find land, so we have to keep going. But then the next time you see them, they're on land, and I thought, oh, they got off the ship with Stephenson on his hunting trip. And that's how they got stranded.
Yes.
And it was totally logical to me, and I read the whole thing. Then the second time I read it, I was like, wait a second. This guy, another little niggly thing, which is also, again, me, not the book. But because Healy's style is, he's got a simplified style for the characters because he's drawing like 12 panels a page, and it's got backgrounds on every panel. It's really very detailed artwork. But he has certain shorthand. So Stephenson has this kind of Tintin kind of haircut. And there's another character called Gall who also has a similar kind of haircut. So I confused. I thought Gall was Stephenson, and I thought he was there with the hunting party. And it really, the second time I read it, I realized I did not read this right. And then I had to really I had to start to reorder it and try to figure out what it actually...
Yeah, I got about halfway through the first time and was like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
And then I started digging back to the earlier pages, and then I realized gradually my error. Yeah, I'm surprised we both made the same mistake, though.
Yeah.
And, you had the visual cue of the different color palettes, but that wasn't enough, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. I think maybe I just wasn't... I think I mentioned in... I don't know if I said on air in an episode or off, but I find reading on a computer or a tablet very... It's hard for me to focus.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm just really old. I don't know what. But especially with a PDF, it's very hard to flip back. Like, I couldn't flip back and see what had happened on this page. And I didn't have that physical sensation of, it was around 1/3 of the way through the book or whatever. I just had no idea of where some memory of some scene was. So I couldn't really backtrack to find it. But anyway... That's kind of all besides the point. But anyway, yeah, so I finally did manage to untangle it. But more than ever, this is a book that I felt like I really wanted to cut up the pages and put them in chronological order and see what it read like that way. Because each section is not out of order, but they're interlaced with each other. So, yeah, it was the second time through. Second time I was more confused than the first time, but finally at the end I really, did the work as a reader and dug in there and figured out what was going on.
I see. Yeah, well, once I figured that out, then when I read it the second time, it all kind of gelled for me.
Right.
Then I figured it out, and I was seeing all the little. I mean, there are the three different timelines, or the three different periods in time, reference each other in ways that kind of help to explain some details about each other. And once you realize that, then it starts to make somewhat more sense.
Yes. A little bit, because sometimes another problem I had with, there's something that's not described in the book, which we were mentioning earlier, some details aren't in there, is in the later expedition, the 21, Stephenson is not part of it.
Right.
He's sent these 5 people off, and I did not understand that.
Yeah, well, it never says
until I went onto Wikipedia. I never figured that out, because they're out there, and Knight, one of the people on the expedition, says, I've been on expeditions with Stephenson before, and he's just abandoned us. And you think, so he was there and he left? No, he means he's kind of sent these people out and forgotten about them, is what he literally means. Mm-hmm. But the way it's phrased, it sounds like he was a part of that expedition at some stage and took off like he did with the earlier expedition.
Yeah, I remember that, but I guess it still didn't quite dawn on me, because the book never is clear about Stephenson's involvement in the later expedition. Yeah, I found the page. It's 128. He says, I knew him, He's talking to this Ada Blackjack, who we haven't talked about yet. Stephenson, 7 years ago, he came wandering out of the snow. I was on his backup ship then. I should have known. He abandoned them, just like he abandoned us. Yeah, just like he abandoned us, he's talking about now, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't catch that until just now. Yeah. Okay, that's what he's talking about there. But, there it could have used more explanation there, because it wasn't clear that he had anything to do with this trip.
Yeah, one...
In fact, the reason that they give in the book for going on that expedition was to claim Wrangel Island, which is north of Siberia, not too far from Alaska, to claim that island for Canada, which Wikipedia says is not quite right. That was their original plan, but the Canadian government refused to assist with the expedition. Then he wanted to claim the land for Britain, but the British government rejected this claim when it was made by the young men. The raising of the British flag on Wrangel Island, acknowledged Russian territory, caused an international incident.
That's an amazing detail, because even the idea of them 5 people going to some island and saying, well, this is Canadian now, it's crazy. You can't just go there and plant the flag and leave, and then you have to set up a colony, you know what I mean? Like a permanent colony. You can't just show up at a place. That struck me as an amazing kind of detail, and I think and from what you've told me now about them trying to also claim it for England, it just sounds like more of Stephenson's kind of obliviousness. Like, he just seemed to not have I don't know. He's like a kid. He's like a Tom Sawyer type character almost. He's just kind of having all these fantastic adventures in his head or whatever. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and where should we go from there? Should we talk about Ada?
We should, because I think she's the most amazing thing in the book.
And she's really kind of the main character of that later expedition. We should say Inuit. I mean, as Healy acknowledges in the back, Eskimo is now seen as kind of a pejorative term, but he uses it in the story for historical accuracy, because that's what they would have said.
Yeah.
So she decides to take this job with them as a seamstress. So it's her and these 4 guys. And they promise her that they're going to hire some more Eskimos on the way out to help them. And then, see, this was a point that got me confused, because then they say, well, we didn't have time to do that because we're going to get caught in the ice. So they just go. But I was confused because just a few pages before that, in the earlier expedition, they're picking up Eskimo families. I'm like, what? What happened to those other Eskimos?
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a detail I had to figure out after I realized there were two expeditions. Anyway, so they get to Wrangel Island, and I guess how did they get there? They just kind of dropped off? I guess they're...
Yeah, because you see, there's one panel where she's standing on the shore and the boat is sailing away from them. So there must have been a crew on the ship that's leaving, so they just got dropped off. So apparently, by being dropped off, this island now becomes Canada all of a sudden. But she's really... Okay, but I mean, she's got so many layers to her, because she was raised by Christian missionaries. Mm-hmm. So she's actually Christian. And she has a son who has tuberculosis. And she doesn't want to abandon him for a year on this expedition.
Yeah, she almost doesn't go at first.
She almost doesn't go. And you can tell she's got kind of a hard life in that Alaskan city where she's living, because somebody calls her over to offer the job, and he says, Ada, blackjack, and she comes over and she says, am I in trouble? So that's like the first thing out of her mouth is like, am I in trouble? As soon as anybody speaks to her, it's like, you can kind of sense what her conditions must be like. She's got this son that's suffering from tuberculosis, and the guy says, you're going to need the money for your son. And she's like, okay. So she agrees to it. And they get stranded, which we've got to talk about that a lot more too. But they basically get stuck out there on that island.
Yeah, because the ice comes in.
The ice comes in, and Stephenson's basically, I guess, forgotten about them or doesn't care or whatever.
Mm-hmm. And then the one guy, Knight, gets scurvy.
Right. And the other guys, it happened on both missions, they decide they're going to walk to Siberia. There's just a sentence, we're going to walk to Siberia. It's to be said twice, but it's the most insane thing. But, so like in both cases, things become desperate. And some of the party has to leave. They decide we're going to leave and try to go get help. So in this case, there were 5 on this last expedition. 3 of them leaving Ada with Knight. And Knight is, he's a racist. He's a horrible guy. He's impossible to get along with. And as soon as they tell her, Ada, you're gonna have to stay with Knight and take care of him, she's horrified. She's like, no, he won't let me help him. Like, you can't do this. But she gets stuck with him. He dies. Spoiler alert for historical fact that's 100 years old. He dies. She's left, to fend for herself. She ends up, while he's sick, she has to learn to hunt, and she has to fend off bears, and she's terrified of bears from the start. And they lie to her, as they do about many things like that, where they're going to pick up more Inuits. They lie and say, oh, there aren't many bears. Or maybe they don't lie. Maybe they're as naive as Stephenson and don't really think it's an issue. Mm. But she goes through all that kind of horrible stuff. And then we learn some more details about her, like she had 2 children that died, and she had a husband that has run off somewhere, and he might be a little bit, whoever her husband was, Blackjack, she calls him, he might be a bit of trouble, because she's worried about him coming back. She's like, what if Blackjack comes back? Like,
no, he's now a surgeon in Japan, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
The Tezuka character.
A very shady surgeon, which kind of lines up, I guess, because this guy, she's a bit, you can feel that she's suffered it. It's in some way at the hands of this guy. So she comes back and she manages to have enough money to cure her son, which is great. She manages to survive in the end.
By the way, Wikipedia says that she was rescued 2 years later.
Yeah, 2 years. Amazing. 2 years. There's like well, we'll get to all the hardship stuff, because I love all that stuff, and we'll get to it. But at the very end of the book, there's a quote from her, which says, "It was no one's fault on my own that I went up there, for no one would have forced me to go, but I wanted to go, and I thought I would never have another chance to go, so I took it." And, what an amazing statement, because we only thought about her going for the money for her son, but her son is in her thoughts, but she kind of has there's some kind of adventure spirit in her, or maybe she doesn't even really, don't know if I should say it, but maybe she doesn't love her son as much as we want to think she does. You know what I mean? Because maybe she's, I don't know how old she was at this time, but maybe she's kind of young and distracted and, wants to go on this adventure.
Okay, well, she was born in 1898, so that would make her in her 20s.
Okay, yeah. But I thought, she's really very interesting. And that kind of reminds me of another interesting aspect of this book is apparently some of these people are like on stamps and stuff, and I love these. I love these. Yeah, amazing
Captain
stories.
Bartlett from the earlier expedition.
Right, I love these stories of like, like forgotten history, but it's like amazing history, like really tremendous things that happened and these amazing lives that people lived, but they're completely forgotten. Like I never would have known about any of this if I hadn't read this book.
Yeah. Coming up, the 2013 thread of the story, pros and cons of Healy's art style and the subtleties in his storytelling, Murphy's Law in a Desolate Place, and just how out of touch this goofball Stephenson was, and more. But first, a word regarding our Patreon page. I'm in the process of redoing the pledge goals listed on the site to reflect better what new features you could expect if we reach each goal. What additional content would you like to see us do if we reach these goals? Let us know at mail@deconstructingcomics.com. I understand that many of you, including most of the people who took our survey, might like to donate, but you feel that money is too tight. But you don't have to throw in much to help out. If everyone who listens gave just $3 a month, we'd be hitting our goals easily, and I could free up more time to make additional content. So please visit patreon.com/deconstructingcomics today and pledge a few dollars a month to keep this show happening and growing. Thanks. If you'd rather send a one-time donation via PayPal, use the email address donate@deconstructingcomics.com. Or you can support us by making your Amazon purchases from deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon. Every little bit helps. More on the listener survey results later in the show.
I'm Batman.
And I'm Robin.
This is Tim.
And this is Paul. To the Bat Polls!
The iTunes reviews are in on To the Bat Polls podcast. These guys do a good job, writes Acello. Who knew that the Batman TV show was such a wellspring of insight into Hollywood trivia, 60s counterculture, sexual mores, and even musical analysis? The Young brothers know their stuff, says Professor Allen. It is a great mix of nostalgia, analysis, and fun. Highly recommended. You've heard the reviews, now try it for yourself. New episodes on the first, third, and fifth Thursdays of the month on iTunes or Stitcher, or at tothebatpolls.libsyn.com.
Batman, the answer to a policeman's prayer.
For nostalgia, analysis, and fun, it's
To the Bat Polls.
So, let's talk about the 2013 thread of this. So, now, the 2013 thread takes place at Dartmouth College, where my brother teaches, although he wasn't there yet. And anyway, the characters in that part are fictional. The main character is this guy Sullivan, who is a professor there. And it figures that Healy would use Dartmouth because it's very close to Center for Cartoon Studies.
Okay.
It's just like a 15-20 minute drive. Now Sully has gotten in trouble for a romantic relationship with a student. And he's on a kind of enforced sabbatical. They tell him he's got too much tenure to be fired. I mean, if you have too much tenure, a certain amount of tenure. Anyway, he's protected by his tenure.
Yeah.
He is tenured. You're not like a lot. It's like being a lot married or a little bit married or pregnant or whatever. Anyway, so they can't fire him. So they put him on a year sabbatical. And then he discovers accidentally that his office used to be Stephenson's office. And I found that Stephenson late in life was, what was it? He was the director of polar studies at Dartmouth. Okay. I didn't know there was such a discipline as polar studies at most colleges. But anyway, and so he becomes curious about Stephenson, and he's hanging out in the library doing research about actually both of the expeditions that we're seeing in the other threads. And what was one thing that was interesting about that was that reading all this history, he sees that Stephenson wasn't such a great guy. Right. But when he says that out loud, one of the other professors gets really angry at him. Yeah. Stephenson was this great man. But well, you know, like a lot of great men in history, when you scratch the surface, you find out that they weren't so great.
Yeah, why did that... that was interesting. Why was that guy so angry that...
Yeah, it wasn't really backed up with... I mean, it wasn't... It could have been clearer kind of why Alistair had held Stephenson in such high regard.
Maybe, I don't know, I think Alistair has it in for Sully because of his relationship with the student. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, maybe that was the real thing that he was angry about. You know, and him coming to this faculty function when he really was basically fired. Not fired, but he was persona non grata in the eyes of the other staff, and probably shouldn't have been going to staff functions, you know. Maybe there's something of that buried in there, I'm not sure. Yeah, it didn't quite add up.
Yeah, well, in that scene, he's not only defending Stephenson as a good person and a brilliant teacher, but he's comparing him to Sully and saying he was twice the man you'll ever be. Not once did he carry on some tawdry affair with a student. So part of it is that he doesn't see Sully as being in any position to put down someone else, I guess.
Right. But I felt like the 2013 plotline was... I mean, it's the weakest part of the book, right? Because the rest of it's so powerful, and I just felt like... I mean, on my second read through, that was the stuff that I kind of skimmed. You know what I mean? Like, it was just not... I don't know if I'm supposed to be drawing a parallel between the two trips, which have strong parallels with each other, and what's happening in 2013, but if there is... I mean, maybe I'm missing it? Or maybe it's not there?
When he finally dumps the student a little bit too late, Sully draws the parallel that the people on the trips, you know, knew what they were getting into and went ahead and made these stupid mistakes, and now he himself is making a stupid mistake that he should have known was a bad idea from the start, just like the explorers, the Arctic explorers did. I don't know how strong of a parallel that is. I mean, they're quite different situations.
Well, that's the thing. I think maybe there's a message in there that the hardships in your own life have some parallels with the explorers of 100 and 200 years ago, but I just felt like all that stuff could have almost been cut, really, from the book, and I think it almost would have been a stronger book for it.
Possibly. It could just be that it maybe, I mean, well, when I first heard what this book was about, it sounded to me like it was going to be this really dry historical read.
Okay.
And I mean, it wasn't. Even without the Sully stuff, I think it wasn't. But maybe having a thread that's in basically the present makes it a little bit more accessible to a modern reader.
Maybe.
It
sounds to me like you got more out of it than I did.
Possibly.
But I'll tell you, there's an amazing line where when after Moorer, however you say his name, is rescued, after the 1913 expedition, he says to the captain, he says, how can we ever go back to our normal lives? Mm-hmm. And sure enough, 8 years later, he's on another ship going back. So he almost died out there on the ice. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, it was such a traumatic experience that, he can't, it's almost like, a soldier coming back from war. It's like,
that was what I thought of too, because a lot of soldiers say that when they come back.
Right. How can we go back to what life was, normal life? And
nobody around me understands.
Yeah, and 8 years later, he re-enlists for another expedition. Well, I kind of thought I saw no parallel with that kind of trauma in the Sully storyline, if you know what I mean. Like, there was nothing.
Well, yeah, getting fired is as bad as it gets in that case.
Yeah, I mean, I can, sure, heartbreak is awful, of course, but there's compared to what these people went through, there's an amazing moment where Ada, who basically hates Knight, or doesn't hate him, but she keeps her distance because he hates her, basically, just for being Inuit or not being able to hunt or whatever, or and just because of his cantankerous personality. But there's an amazing scene where he says you should go sleep in the other tent tonight, this storage tent or whatever. She goes and sleeps there, and you got these panels full of coughing. The coughing stops, and she knows he's dead. So you got a couple of silent panels, and then she starts to cry. So, she's totally isolated. Mm-hmm. Even this guy that she didn't really give a damn about.
Yeah, although I mean, their relationship improves, I think, before he dies.
Yeah, they do gain a sort of respect because she does manage to kill some things, and he finds out that she can read, and she reads his Bible and stuff. So yeah, there's some kind of gained respect there, but I mean, nothing in Sully's life compares to that kind of isolation. I mean, 2 years, I don't know at what stage he died, but imagine being out there 2 years and then suddenly you're all completely alone and there's no hope of rescue. That's
or
incredible.
Seemingly, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I almost felt like every time it got to a Sully scene, I just felt like it was kind of deflating it, and I wanted to get back to the good stuff.
Now, like I said, it's not a dry read. In ways it does feel a little stiff to me, though. Maybe partly it's the art style. I mean, there are a lot of kind of far away shots. I mean, he does zoom in on the faces somewhat, but even then, I mean, there's not very much detail to them. I mean, you can mostly tell them apart, but I mean, even when I look at them closely, I'm not sure that I'm seeing what they look like in some cases. Also, I mean, he has this really strict, well, not fairly strict kind of grid where every page has 4 rows of panels, except for those 3 2-page scenes that open the book. And then I guess the pages where it kind of sets like Nome, Alaska 1913, Nome, Alaska 1921, Hanover, New Hampshire 2013. In those cases, the first 2 rows are combined into one panel. So there are those 6 pages, and then the first 3 repeat later. exactly, which kind of surprised me that he just repeated those scenes exactly.
Yeah, no, some foreshadowing, because the first time you read it, I actually thought that was great, because the first time you read it, you don't know what's going on.
True.
But that's actually the rock bottom moment for all three storylines. It's not going to get any worse than this. And that's really like almost the moment before, the darkness before the dawn. For all Yeah, I thought that was great.
But yeah, anyway, other than those, there are 4 rows of panels on every page with 2 or 3 panels in every row. And so it's... A lot of the art feels really kind of small and detailed, and it's not bad, but
no, I think he's totally. I think he's going for a Hergé style, for sure, because there's so many panels, and like I said, that 2 characters do have Tintin's haircut. I love the art. I thought it was great. And I think there's more panel variation than you were giving it credit for. Like I'm looking at page 160, and he really opens it up when you want to see that frozen tundra. Like, he opens it up with big panels, and anytime bears show up, because Ada's so afraid of them, often it stretches. You get a really wide angle panel across the page. So I thought it was.
Oh yeah, there's another one. Yeah. That 160 does have. Well, I guess that's one of those introductory scenes, but yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, if you just flip through, you'll see that he does do some stretched out panels, and he's kind of smart about when to do them, like for emotional impact or to really establish the setting where necessary. I thought the art was great. Totally.
And yeah, we mentioned the different color palettes. That was a good idea. Although it didn't completely prevent confusion for either one of us, but
yeah, not the first time or the second time for me. But yeah, eventually once I figured it out, I think it was the second read I figured out, because the second read was the one where I figured out it was 2 different expeditions, and then I was like, okay, so the color palette's kind of guiding you along. But yeah.
Some of the storytelling is really subtle. There's the panel or the page where in the earlier expedition, the captain is told by the crew members that the casing of the ship's engine is new. They had thought that the whole thing was new, but then they looked inside and they found that the engine itself was a wreck, which I guess Stephenson had led the captain to believe that it was in better shape than it was. And so you see the captain just kind of looking at Stephenson. And, it's not explained. You have to kind of... if you've absorbed the earlier scenes, and you should know why he's looking at him. And Stephenson looks kind of uncomfortable.
Yes. Yeah.
But he doesn't blow up at Stephenson and say, "But you told me that it was in great shape." There's nothing like that. But it's very subtle.
And I think I think Captain Bartlett is interesting too. I think you pointed out something interesting. Was in his first scene, he sees this father and mother with a little kid, and he's like, "I never want to have kids." Because look how that kid is manipulating his parents. And Bartlett never has any agency through the book. I mean, he's a pushover, basically. Well, when he comes on the ship, he's really tough, and somebody, when the crew are being introduced, somebody makes some sort of flippant remark, and Bartlett's like, "You step forward." He said, "You're off my ship." And it turns out to be the first mate.
Yeah.
That he's just fired. But after that, I mean, he just... he knows everything that Stephenson kind of cajoles him into doing stuff. He kind of sweet talks him. I think even Knight says that there's that same page, and Knight says something like, that Stephenson, he was so nice. So he's just such a nice, easygoing guy that everybody kind of goes along with what he says, I guess. But, despite Bartlett complaining about this kid and how he's never going to have a family and be told what to do, he's told what to do all the time. And he decides to, once they get stuck on the ice, he's like, okay, I'm going to walk to Siberia. And, that's yet another hellish trip. And, he breaks his leg and he gets knocked out for like 2-3 weeks. He's asleep. And he's being led around. I thought he was quite, interesting like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, but another thing about talking about the subtlety of the art is something in that first page, which comes back later, is one of the dog sled dogs, actually somehow gets out of its chain and runs off. And the first time you read it, you can barely tell what's happening in that panel because the dog's just a smudge running away. And you're like, well, I didn't even notice what had really happened. And then it wasn't until the second time before I realized the dog had escaped.
Yeah. Another thing that was subtle is so on the earlier voyage there are scientists and crew members and Eskimo families, and there's kind of not enough room on the ship for everybody, and the scientists and the crew members are getting on each other's nerves, and there's a argument about this Victrola that one of the scientists has been playing the same record on over and over, and the crew member mentions that it's Chopin's Funeral March.
Yeah.
Then later, when the ship is sinking and Bartlett looks around on the ship, he plays the Victrola. And if you remember that earlier scene, the only record they have is Chopin's Funeral March.
Yeah, I love that. Totally love that. That was such a great touch. And that's a great page, too, because you can see the ship rocking back and forth like the way he's done the panels. He stays in that grid, but the ship's completely sideways this way or that way. It's so great. Yeah, he sits down and listens to the record, and it's the only record they've got on there is the Funeral March. And he goes back to listen to it. And what is the guy, like one of the people, like everybody else has gone on to shore while the ship is sinking, and he goes back in, and somebody says...
But he's not going to go down with the ship, is he? Yeah, you don't think he intends to go down with the ship, and someone else says, a man just needs to mourn.
Right. Okay, that's a great line. So he goes back to the ship, and he sits down on this rocking ship and listens to the Funeral March, and it was a great moment. Yeah, you have to, you have to be tuned up. You have to be turned on as a reader. Like, you have to do some work with this book, and that's fun. But in moments like that, that was a rewarding moment especially the second read, when I realized that was the only record. And he was just sitting down listening to it, with this maudlin look on his face. It was great.
But yeah, I think you definitely have to read the book twice to get everything.
Oh yeah, I think I needed a third time to pick up on all of it. Yeah. What was that? Okay, so let's talk about the Hardships, because this is, to me, I love any book about the hell of the desert or the tundra. But everything that can go wrong on both these voyages goes wrong. Like, so we mentioned like the, okay, so they get trapped in the ice immediately.
In the first trip,
yeah. They start drifting. They totally miscalculate the drift by like 1,000 miles or something like that, right?
Right. They didn't think they were anywhere near Wrangel Island, but then they found it. Right.
And then they find out that the engine is not a new engine like they thought. It's just an old engine with a new casing.
Before the trip starts, the captain is complaining to Stephenson that this ship can't handle ice.
Yeah.
And Stephen's like, oh, yeah, it's fine, don't worry. But, of course, it can't handle ice. And
it can't handle ice. And he still keeps going through the ice anyway. This is another, Bartlett being...
just kind of a pushover, like you said.
Yeah, he just kind of goes through the ice anyway. He doesn't put he never puts his foot down.
Yeah, it's like, all right, it's a bad idea, but okay, let's go ahead and
but
go do our due.
He does seem to have strong principles, like when they get off, when everybody's off the ship after it sinks, which is another, awful thing that happens. The scientists say, we're going to go our own way. And he says, okay, well, you're not part of the ship, so you're free men. You can do what you want. And he even gives them supplies so they can travel. And then they find them dead, of course. All the scientists are dead. I don't know if it was a few days later or what, or, but it's, he does have certain seafaring principles, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
But other times he just seems to do what Stephenson wants, because Stephenson is such a cheery guy and calls himself the leader or whatever.
Yeah, well, and even though he's kind of sick himself, he makes sure that someone will go back and rescue his crew.
Right, that's right, yeah, that's right. So he does care about those things, but, maybe he shouldn't have gotten them in that situation in the first place.
Yeah.
So then on the other one, on the other expedition, the later one, so those guys, so 3 of the 5, so Knight ends up getting scurvy. 3 of the men end up going the walk to Siberia again. I can't, every time I say it, it's amazing.
With predictable results.
Yes, for those guys, somehow Bartlett made it, but he was knocked out for most of it. Anyway, so those guys, they're never heard from again. And that's one of the things on my second read I figured out, Mora died on that route, so he couldn't be. Anyway, Ada she's got the rifle. She has to hunt, because Knight can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So she goes out there. She's a horrible shot. She finally, she traps the fox. She shoots like 3 times, misses, and then she walks up and bludgeons it with the butt of the rifle, which is it's a powerful moment. And she becomes kind of hardened, and that's kind of a theme that comes up. It's mentioned a few times, is how it transforms you when you're out there. At the end, Knight we get an excerpt from Knight's diary, which is amazingly articulate, considering how he's portrayed in the book. Maybe he was smarter than than what we see of him. But anyway, so he talks about how he went out as a boy, but he came back like a man, like it had changed him.
Mm-hmm.
So Ada's changed out there too, and so she has to get over her fear of these bears. And there's an interesting moment too where at the very first, when you get those 3 vignettes, the 3 scenes, and you don't really know what's happening, Ada's scene stops with her coming out of the tent and seeing a bear standing there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a great comics moment because it's a frozen panel, and then you turn the page and it's some other scene. It's almost like it was a very casual, like there was no threat from the bear.
Hi, bear.
Yeah, it was just like, no problem. Or it's something she does every day. You don't really know at that stage what's going to happen. So she's dealing with the bears, and then Knight dies, and she can't even bury him. Like, everything just gets worse and worse and worse. And, Bartlett
the ground's too hard.
They've got to cross this chasm, and Bartlett, he's literally throwing the sled dogs across the chasm. It's also an amazing moment. And then he grabs one of the dogs and jumps across, and then he breaks his leg. Can you imagine breaking your leg on a walk to Siberia?
Yeah.
And then he has to be towed on the sled.
By the other Eskimo guy who's with him.
Oh, yeah, and she at one point she kills a seal, and a bear steals the seal before she can get to it.
Yeah.
I mean, I just thought all that stuff was so moving. But the only drawback was the way the book is, you don't really realize she was out there for 2 years. Mm-hmm. It could have been 6 months or something from what we
the book doesn't really give you an idea of how much time has gone by in any place.
I think maybe if we paid real hard attention to how much snow was on the ground, and if they mentioned seasons and stuff, then maybe you'd be able to work it out from the book.
Possibly.
But, I mean, until I went onto Wikipedia, I didn't realize that she was out there 2 years, and that makes it even more heartbreaking, when you think about her being out there alone and that total hell. I can't imagine. It's just inconceivable.
Yeah.
And another crazy thing is that expedition was 1921.
Mm-hmm.
And according to the introduction, Stephenson wrote his book, The Friendly Arctic, in 1922. So he had abandoned these 5 people on this island and then wrote a book about how easy it is to live in the Arctic a year later.
Or he was trying to demonstrate that, yeah. If it could be demonstrated that food suitable to sustain indefinitely both men and dogs could be secured anywhere in the polar sea, then obviously journeys over the ice would cease to be limited either in time or distance. So he's still committed to that idea, although neither of the expeditions have worked out.
Yeah. Ada and Knight are stuck in this living hell, and he's here writing this book called The Friendly Arctic about how he just... amazing. Totally amazing. And at the end of the book, Healy has this afterword where he says, Stephenson is actually regarded a little bit higher than I portrayed him in the book. But looking at this date of 1922, it's hard to believe that he could have been anything other than completely oblivious to the realities.
Yeah, Stephenson, despite this book's perhaps dim view of him, went on to contribute significantly to the field of Arctic science. Yeah.
So, I don't know, but he abandons that shit. Like he says he's going to go on this hunting trip, and he just goes, and we never see him. He's just gone.
Although that's a case where like walking back succeeds because he's still alive after that, but
yes.
We don't see that happening.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean there are a few problems with the book, but overall I thought it was interesting. I thought it was pretty good once I kind of got a handle on it.
Yeah.
Although it concerns me a little that we both made that mistake of thinking there was one voyage here instead of two.
I think part of the problem is his balloon size doesn't really change, or the balloon shape, and maybe you don't pay enough attention to the panel that says 1913 or 1922. And he only does it once. He doesn't do it twice. After that, he expects you to understand the color scheme to work out what's happening. And maybe if those balloons had been bigger that first time,
those
maybe
text
even
boxes.
a whole maybe in a whole black page that says 1922, it would have been maybe clearer. But maybe we should be doing the work. I don't know. I think I like the book more than you. I like I said, I love any kind of hardships of the wild stories. So I particularly, this was in my wheelhouse, but I think I liked the 2013 stuff a lot less than you did. I just didn't, we worked out this is Healy's first book, right?
I
first full
believe
length.
It's probably, what was it, on Goodreads, it said his comics work has been published in several anthologies.
Okay.
And then he helped with Lucy Nisley's Something New.
Right.
But yeah, I think this must be his first full length.
I think it sounds like he's super young and new, and he's gonna work it out, and the next couple of books are gonna be even better. That's my guess.
Yeah, I would bet so, yes. But yeah, I like this book too. Even though it took a while to understand what I was reading. But I guess if you have to work a little bit, that can be good.
Sure.
So,
sure.
Yeah.
Like the thing with the record, like there's stuff that it's good, was really rewarding to work out as a reader. So,
How to Survive in the North by Luke Healy is published by Nobrow. And now a bit about our recent listener survey. Thanks to everyone who participated. The sample size was quite small considering how many downloads we get each week, but here are a few observations on the data we did get. The survey asked about 9 types of things this show could cover and how interested the listener was in each one. All of them scored at least 50% very interested. The most popular types of content were reviews of recent graphic novels, discussion of past classic comics, and interviews of established creators. Favorite past episodes included the interview with Lucy Nisley in episode 458, Kumar's talk about manga translation in episode 231, and our reviews of Death Note, episode 224, Watchmen, 176, Mouse, 77, V for Vendetta, 428, and The Dark Knight Returns, which I'd forgotten we ever talked about. But there it was, way back in episode 196 in 2009. With listeners recalling these old episodes, does that mean the recent episodes are lacking? Interviewees you'd like to hear include Steve Englehart, Alex Ross, Dan Pariro, and Warren Ellis. Okay, I'll see what I can do about those. A majority of respondents felt that our show's broad focus was a strength rather than a weakness, and rejected the notion that came up in a recent iTunes review that we've been somehow intolerant of other people's views. So I appreciate your support on those points. Of course, it's never too late to tell us how you feel about the show. You can write us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com or look us up on social media. We can be found on Patreon, Twitter, Tumblr, Facebook, and YouTube. All our social media links can be found on the right sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com. Also, please give us a review on iTunes or Stitcher. Our theme is from bensound.com. Last Thursday on To the Bat Polls, we looked at Carolyn Jones as Marcia, Queen of Diamonds, and refuted the notion that this arc is full of filler. Plus some Bat research and your mail. Look up To the Bat Polls wherever you find your podcasts or at tothebatpolls.libsyn.com. This coming Thursday, right here in this podcast feed, a new edition of our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics, where Mulele and I critique comics by listeners. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com, and please try to keep it to about 30 pages. Next week, a talk with creator Box Brown, who put out a graphic novel about pro wrestler Andre the Giant 2 years ago, and is about to release his second full-length OGN, Tetris, about the invention of the popular video game in the Soviet Union and the mad scramble for the rights to it that took place in the 1990s. Till next week, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.